Welcome to Carbon Politics, a CSE podcast series decoding the politics of climate change from the lens of the Global South. In this series, we will explore multiple critical questions that are surrounding and pressuring the climate debate today. What happens next on multilateralism, or where is the current trade system going? And how does the global financial architecture need to be reformed? How are these systems influencing the ability of developing countries to address, respond to, and adapt to climate change? These are some of the critical questions we hope to answer, and we hope you join us on this journey this year.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is widely regarded as the authoritative body on climate science. Its assessments have shaped international climate negotiations, informed national climate policies, and influenced public discourse on climate change for over 3 decades. Despite growing scientific certainty, climate science continues to be misunderstood, misrepresented, and contested in public discourse. US President Donald Trump, in a social media post last month, said, and I quote, "United Nations top climate committee just admitted that its own projections were wrong. In times of climate denialism, it becomes important to understand and reaffirm climate science and its impacts. In this episode of Carbon Politics, we have with us two distinguished IPCC authors, Dr. Minal Pathak, who is an associate professor at the Global Center for Environment and Energy at the University of Ahmedabad, and Dr. Aditi Mukherji, who is a principal scientist, climate action at the International Livestock Research Institute. We will talk to them about the work of IPCC, the challenges of communicating climate science, and what is the future of their work with the body. Dr. Mukherji and Dr. Pathak, welcome to Carbon Politics. I would like to begin with asking you, just for our audiences to understand, what does the IPCC do? What are the things that we hear about assessment cycles, working groups, and share a bit about your experience working as IPCC authors and also the challenges that you may have faced working in this area. I would like to begin with Dr. Pathak, sorry.
Thank you so much, Trishant. I was just going to add that let me respond and then maybe Aditi can come in. So very briefly, I guess a lot of people know that IPCC is the international body that assesses the science related to climate change. It was established a little over 30 years ago, and it's a unique interface between science and policy. So it's the purpose of the IPCC is to provide scientific information on the state of climate change, on impacts, and on mitigation options that reduce the emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. What's not very frequently or commonly known is that IPCC does not conduct its own research. The job of the IPCC is to assess existing research, and IPCC is not expected to be policy prescriptive. So we do not intend to or tell governments and audiences on what to do, but policy relevant in the sense provide a menu of options on what can be done. And also just to add that the IPCC report takes between 5 and 7 years, which is what we call an assessment cycle. The current IPCC is in its 7th assessment cycle, and we've so far published 6 assessment reports. This report will be published in maybe around 2029, 2030. IPCC reports are voluntary contributions from hundreds of scientists. So about the last cycle had over 700 authors contributing to the assessment. And these chapters, they assess hundreds of scientific articles, great literature. So it's a very rigorous process. And this is a science policy interface. So governments also have a say in the IPCC report outlines, but also the final assessment. And finally, IPCC has 3 working groups, as many of you already know. The first one, Working Group 1, is called the Physical Science Basis, looks at the scientific aspects of the state of climate. Working Group 2, in which Aditi Mukherji is an author, looks at impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And I'm an author on Working Group 3, which deals with the mitigation of climate change. There's also the task force on greenhouse gas inventories, which looks at the processes of how inventories are built. I'll pass over to Aditi in case I've missed anything.
No, I think, Minal, you had covered everything. Maybe just to add in the 3 working groups, increasingly, so working group 1 you can take as it is kind of why climate change is happening and how is it affecting the physical dimensions like temperature, precipitation, etc. And then working group 2 and 3 is, so working group 1 is why the problem occurs. Working group 2 and 3 can be seen as, so what can we do about it? So working group 2 is about how can we adapt to climate change and its impacts, while working group 3 is how can we actually reduce climate change by reducing emissions of greenhouse gas. So I think that's a neat way of looking at it. Why climate change is happening and what can we do by adapting and by mitigating. So those are the 3 working groups that Dr. Pathak was talking about.
So I guess my experience as an author has been extremely rewarding, and it is very intense, as we mentioned, in terms of time and effort, but it's also very rewarding to work alongside brilliant scientists, this co-production with governments. And sometimes you see action in very unexpected places, like, for example, in the form of a sectoral policy, or when a government takes up IPCC reports and translates it into national policy. So it is challenging, but it's also rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, I would absolutely like to echo what Minal said. It's an extremely rewarding and something that I would personally encourage as many scientists and authors from India, if they can be a part of IPCC, either formally as authors in the next cycle, but also in this round as reviewers, because they also play a very important role. And then just the sheer, as scientists, what's particularly satisfying is to see that the findings making it to the highest level of policy making. For example, the influence that IPCC AR6 had on the International Court of Justice's recent, judgment around, So those kind of, you actually see that you are in a UNFCCC COP meeting, and you see that sections from your chapter being quoted to support a decision. So I think it is an extremely policy relevant piece of work, and the ability to work with the global scientist is a fantastic one.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pathak and Dr. Mukherjee, for that. I would like to continue talking to Dr. Mukherjee on, so over the years, IPCC has increasingly become confident in its findings on climate science. And yet, what we widely see is that the climate science continues to be widely misunderstood, misrepresented, and contested in public debates. From your experience as IPCC authors, where does this gap exist, and what can be done to improve the understanding of climate science among the public? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and an important question that most of us as authors of IPCC or consumers of IPCC, we often basically grapple with. And I know all of us have been thinking quite a bit around it. So I feel perhaps the reason this gap persists is the scientific confidence and public understanding do not always move in the same way. So if you read any of the IPCC reports, as I'm sure you have, you would see that we do our assessment using careful language, calibrated uncertainty, and there is this basic with the summary for policymakers. There is that basic need for consensus building among the different countries who are approving those summaries. So what happens is that the language becomes a bit more complicated or complex than what general public can often understand. So in the public debate, you possibly need more simple language, more certainty, more black and white kind of positioning of things. But good science requires that we are careful, we are providing robust evidence, but we are not understating or overstating our case. So I think language often, then the style in which these reports are written, becomes a bit of a barrier. And this is where the role of other stakeholders like communications, like popular science magazines, etc., comes in. How do you take that, use carefully calibrated scientific language and break it down as a popular science? But that itself, IPCC itself doesn't do that. And then I think the second reason is that many people might think, oh, this is like very, very high science. I have to understand, I don't know, atmospheric chemistry, physics to understand what's happening. But what's important to know is, as I was saying earlier, that IPCC also deals with what can we do about the problem. So our reports touch on things like day-to-day things like, water, food, energy. For example, I was the coordinating lead author of the water chapter in the last cycle. Then what kind of development pathways we want to be in. So there is a lot for general public to get from it, but often again I think the language, the way it is written, may be a barrier. And the third, and I like to stop here and maybe pass on to Dr. Pathak, is actually also the communication environment itself has changed. There is just so much of social media, so much of misinformation. So I think all of these makes communication of our science a bit more harder than it was maybe some 5-10 years ago. So yeah, I'll stop there, and maybe Minal, you have more to add.
Yeah, no, I think you've summarized well. I mean, I'll just continue from where Aditi was speaking. And I think there is, of course, the politics of climate and action and inaction, right? And it's the elephant in the room, and it has always been around, and it's stronger now than it ever was. And we often see that the stronger and more powerful voices tend to influence public opinion. We are already seeing what's happening in the US and elsewhere. And of course, there are national narratives too, and it makes it challenging, therefore, when laypersons are have to deal with this very complex scientific information with their day-to-day realities, and then what's being communicated by their leaders. So, in addition to the complexity of IPCC reports, I think the politics is a major factor. And on your question on what can be done, I think we just have to work harder and do our jobs better, and we have to keep going. Regardless of how the world is changing, I think we have to be stronger now. So we not only believe in and produce better science, robust science, but we improve the communication of science, and we reach out really to the stakeholders who are impacted. And I think CSC is really a great case and example, I would say, and podcasts like these and fora like these help to reach out to more people than we would through a regular scientific report. So I think I would also like to emphasize the importance of local languages. I would also like to say maybe as more solutions communication is the need, because I think people sometimes tend to dismiss doomsday narratives of the future, but we also want to talk about what's really a local impact that those communities are facing. So we have to tailor these findings to the audience and sort of provide them with solutions that they understand, can relate to, and can implement.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for mentioning CSE's work in this area and why CSE's role as an actor in communicating science becomes important. Thank you for that. As the work under the next assessment cycle gets underway, what are the key questions that you are dealing with right now and in your respective areas of work, and what does the future look like?
So in this cycle, I am I'm coordinating a chapter called Technical Guidelines on Impacts and Adaptation. This was something that was a specific demand from many low and middle income countries. So this is a product which, just like you have guidance for how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, similarly, over the years, a demand has come through that there should be similar guidance for how to do adaptation in ways that reduces climate change impact. So that's the work I'm doing in this cycle. So some of the challenges is something we share with everyone. I think we have a much more polarized world than at the start of AR6. Now we have a lot more. I think climate change skeptics were there even in 2018, 2019, but it's just that they have now got a more audience, or they are in positions of power. So I think that polarization is something all of us will be facing in AR7. Then looking at adaptation in particular, one of the challenges has been that adaptation is so context specific, it's so local, that coming up with something that's universally valid is going to be a challenge. So that's the kind of the fine line between how do you come up with guidelines of how to do adaptation at a global level, while being conscious of adaptation having much more local ramifications. So those are the two that I can really see: a lot of mistrust around science on the one hand, and a challenging product around delivering a global product that has a lot of local ramifications.
Thank you. And I'll just pick up on what I'm doing. I'm wearing two hats this cycle. So for the special report on climate change and cities, which will be released in March 2027, my chapter looks at solutions by city types and regions. And we carry out a comprehensive assessment of what's happening really in cities. And we're trying really, there isn't that much evidence. I mean, I think the evidence is biased. There is a lot more publications in the global north cities. And so it's been a challenge to document particularly the small and medium-sized cities in less represented countries. So that's what that chapter does. And then in the main report, the assessment report 7 in the mitigation working group, I'm an author on the sustainable development chapter. So again, very relevant to India as well, but looking at what mitigation options, how they interact with sustainable development, and can we find those wins, and really going into the details of not just saying that there are co-benefits, but what those co-benefits are, and also look at trade-offs particularly. And I think we've touched upon all of this in the previous cycle, but this time we would like to go deeper into specific context, maybe if literature permits. But I would like to focus on one or two challenges in addition to what Aditi mentioned, and one of them is AI. And we just didn't have this problem in the previous cycle. And now you have, it's just hard to control what AI will generate, both in terms of how authors will use it, but also how reviewers will use it. And how do we keep a check on particularly false positives and false negatives and all the jargon that they use? I'm not an AI expert, but I do find it quite challenging to deal with this volume of AI that's coming into the assessment. And what might be the checks and balances that we will need now, but also just a couple of years down the line, given the speed at which it's moving. The second thing I find it challenging is that the growing volume of literature on climate change is just too much, given that authors are also doing day jobs, right? We all have day jobs, teaching, research, whatever we are all doing. And IPCC is that additional work that we do because we have committed to that role. And I feel like it's becoming more challenging this cycle.
Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee and Dr. Pathak, for your comments. And thank you for joining us for this podcast and sharing your insights. As vulnerability to climate change grows and the need for credible science grows, there are formidable challenges that we are going to deal with. Some of these challenges were mentioned by our authors. Thank you for listening to Carbon Politics. See you in the next episode.